Welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending December 24th, 2016. Here, thanks to our hardworking slave pools filled with space leopards and sock puppets, we have compiled a list of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. In Polecat Cast number 93, we talk about the news of the week, including a play about locker room talk, Germany's final solution to the fake news problem, and MP Philip Davies' act of he-railing the discussion.
Every day that passes, we get closer to Kojima's dystopia. I think we can all agree, right, Brian?
Yes.
Yes. In an interview published 2 days ago, the one that you see on, I'm going to translate it for you, Germany's Justice Minister, Heiko Maas, it's an awesome name, said that judges and state prosecutors need to crack down as quick as possible on fake news and hate speech, particularly on social media platforms like Facebook. Maas has repeatedly warned Facebook to respect the laws against defamation in Germany, which are much more rigid than those in the United States. He notes particularly that, quote, defamation and malicious gossip are not covered under freedom of speech. If one were to violate these principles, one could see up to 5 years in jail. This concern with fake news has garnered more attention with the upcoming German parliamentary election expected in September. It will be interesting to see how many cases will be prosecuted in an election year, because in 2015, a shocking 218,000 cases involving insults were filed with prosecutors. Who knows how much higher it could be in 2017? On top of this, fears of fake news have increased after the head of Germany's domestic intelligence agency reported a rise in Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing German society. Finally, last Friday, the parliamentary floor leader for Angela Merkel's Conservatives said that government wanted to introduce a law in early 2017 that would require social media firms to set up local offices to respond faster to complaints.
If I may be so bold as to try and, shed some light on this subject a little bit. It's funny that Facebook is saying they're going to try and stop this fake news, and all this sort of thing, because Facebook and every other site on the internet that up until, about a year and a half ago was posting fake news articles on a regular basis because they were getting paid for it because it was native advertising, is to blame for this. Mm-hmm. They fucking propagated the situation. They made millions and millions of dollars off of this shit. They've been doing it for years until fucking Gamergate got the fucking FTC to change the laws. So to hear them talking about, we're really upset about this. Oh gosh, we got to put a stop to this. Blah, 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 blah. Motherfuckers, y'all created it. You created a fucking ecosystem of fucking profit around fake news articles in your fucking websites. I kind of wonder where they're coming from.
Well, I wonder about that too. There is I guess there are two ways to look at it, or maybe there are two at least subgroups within what we consider to be media and journalism that is usually spread throughout social media. There's the stuff that's trying to sell you something, and the stuff that's trying to peddle an ideology, alter your views, cause you to vote a certain way or whatever. There's the stuff that has a political agenda, and there's the stuff that has a profit-driven agenda. Now, you were talking about the false advertising thing. I mean, obviously, if it's a profit-motivated piece of media, that's going to be relatively straightforward in terms of whether or not it's fake, because you can check the facts on that and find out if what they're saying is true, and if it isn't, then it's fake, right? And then, but then there are some things that might be harder to determine, not just because they may not be true, but rather because it's impossible to determine how legit it is. For example, let's say there were the videos about the solar freaking roadways. When you're making videos for solar freaking roadways, and you're basically telling people what they're going to get if they donate to the Kickstarter, there's a lot there that can be debunked, but I don't think that the persons making the video shouldn't be able to make the video anyway. As long as other people should be able to come out and say, this is bullshit and here's why. I don't really think that that's a problem, and I don't know that it's malicious. It could just be greed motivated. But when it comes to the ideological stuff, like if you have Al Jazeera and they're like taking, quotes out of their political opponents out of context, and they're trying to, they're trying to misrepresent or alter the facts in order to drive home a narrative, whether it's about America or the Middle East or some other government or whatever, or they're trying to talk about feminism and they're clearly bullshitting, that's not going to get called out as fake news, although it probably should. And at the same time, if you want to go to the other end of the spectrum, if you have like some kind of conspiracy website talking about how, the chemtrails are making the frogs gay, that is also probably something you can consider fake news. But then even for those, I would wonder whether or not it's a good idea to censor them.
Unexpectedly, we have an article from The Guardian that only reports the facts of the situation, although, their bias maintains its strong undercurrent. An MP in the UK named Philip Davies was recently elected to the Parliament's Equalities Committee. This caused a stir for many other MPs, including our beloved Jess Phillips in the Labour Party, because of Mr. Davies' anti-feminist tendencies. Last Friday, Davies spoke for more than an hour in the House of Commons, filibustering a bill meant to protect women against violence. His reasoning for doing this centers on the fact that men are the primary victims of public sphere violence. Naturally, the vote for the bill passed 135 to 2, yet that didn't stop Mr. Davies from continuing his advocacy. In his speech, he noted that people would try to characterize his opposition to the bill as being for violence against women, which he was very right to do, as the Liberal Democrat Party's press office tweeted the following: "Why on earth would you spend your Friday trying to block this? Philip Davies' constituents getting very poor value." The aforementioned Jess Phillips said the following in support of the bill: "For some people, they wake up on Christmas Day and they will try not to say anything wrong. They will make sure everything is perfect. They will have risk assessed every single step that they take throughout the day, because just this one day their children deserve not to have the monster that lives in their home erupt in their faces." To this, I think I can speak for the Badgers and everybody listening at home when I say, no fucking shit.
Oh man, I got to jump on this one.
All right.
Look, you know what? Jess Phillips can fucking eat a dick straight up. Seriously. Like, no, for real. Like, she's trying to frame this as as women are cowering in fear against men. With my fucking ex, the one that fucking punched me, I talked about this last week or the week before. This was what it was like living with her. I was fucking on eggshells, like towards the end of our relationship. I was on eggshells all the time. I had to plan out things that I said in advance, because if I said the wrong fucking thing, she would fucking explode on me. So get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. This infuriates me. This makes me livid to a point where I want to punch things. I'm just so toxic and masculine right now. This is insane. This is not an issue based on sex, and for her to fucking turn it into one, God, she is so fucking ignorant. I mean, I'm not saying anything new here. Everybody knows that Jess Phillips is an ignorant bitch, but fucking this is disgusting. This infuriates me that they try and turn these things into, oh, it's only men, abusing women. It's always men abusing women. It's never the other way around. It's
sexist.
I wouldn't even
my God.
Eat your dick. I wouldn't even eat your dick, Jess. Wouldn't.
This is funny because of the irony in it, but it is, when you really think about it, there are a couple things at play. One is guilt, obviously,
right.
And that comes from, I think, a self-loathing that is taught and repeated over and over and over through interactions with your peers, in academia, and so on. But I do not limit, and I try not to, if at all possible, I try not to limit this stuff to white people, because I know that minorities are just as bad and capable of it as well. But the reason,
this is a human issue.
It's a human issue.
Color.
But the difference is in perhaps it would appear. Well, look at the guy Butler or whatever. He's like worth $4 million, and he was the guy who was like, we got nothing to lose but our chains at Mizzou or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. He's like a black guy, but son of a millionaire. Right. But when it comes down to it, I've noticed that the people who don't have anything, they engage in the have-nots, as it were. They engage, if they become SJWs, they do so because they want resources. The people who have, or at least believe that they do, because they buy into the whole privilege thing, they do it because they want to alleviate their guilt. They want to have the moral high ground so they don't have to feel bad about what they are, when in actual fact there's no reason for them to feel bad in the first place. And the people who are just chasing after resources, they are feeling justified by it because they're being told that the world did this to them, specifically Group B over here. So going back to Jess Phillips, I think that her lack of empathy. Like, she probably is too old to see how much what she believes is potentially, if not outright, blatantly harmful towards men and worse towards boys, because that's invisible to, especially to people like her. Like, I think a normie, if you introduce all the problems that boys have to a normal person that isn't like fixed on being a feminist or whatever, if you tell them these are all the problems that boys have, I think that they would sympathize, provided they didn't buy into all the rhetoric. But people like Jess Phillips, she's like got like the Grinch heart, like the tiny shriveled up black heart, because she's an ideologue. She's just operating.
She's got her heels dug in. Yeah.
She just follows her programming.
The winter holiday week in Europe began with death and violence. 2 Islamic terrorist attacks, happening mere hours apart from one another, were committed Monday in Berlin and Turkey. In Turkey, the Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrev Karlov, was shot multiple times by off-duty Turkish police officer. The assassin, Meyrut Mert al-Intash, shouted Allah Akbar, as well as "Do not forget Aleppo, do not forget Syria," after the attack. Al-Intash was subsequently shot dead by Turkish authorities, but not before injuring 3 others. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Ambassador Karlov succumbed to his injuries. The attack is believed to have been an attempt to weaken the newly warming relations between Syria and Russia. Meanwhile, in Berlin, a yet-to-be unidentified man driving a stolen truck plowed through a Christmas market, killing 12 and injuring over 40. Inside the truck, a Polish man was found shot dead. It appears that he was the original driver of the truck, who was also killed by the attacker in a hijacking. The driver fled the scene shortly after the attack. German police arrested 23-year-old Pakistani asylum seeker shortly after, but were forced to release him due to lack of evidence after he tested negative for gunshot residue. German police are currently preparing to launch a manhunt for the perpetrator. The attack has drawn comparisons to the truck attack in Nice, France earlier this year. The Islamic State has also taken responsibility for this attack. Something you have to consider when you're talking about Putin. Putin used to be, he's KGB, or he was KGB. He was head of the KGB. He knows how to keep shit tight. He knows how to keep things close to his vest. So when he comes out and he's just like, yeah, that's something. There's shit going on behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. But I think he is savvy enough to not overreact. I don't like Putin a whole lot. I'm not like a big fan of his or anything, but I think from seeing what we've seen from him in the past and knowing his background, I think he's savvy enough to know that, some crazy fucking response or him going out there and start yelling about shit is probably not the way he's going to handle it. Because that's not been the way he's handled things to this point anyway, not that I'm aware of anyway. He's generally been pretty reserved and pretty tight-lipped about stuff for the most part.
The Trump grab him by the pussy tape has provoked feminist fear, public outrage, and now an inspirational play. Scotland's leading theatre, Traverse Theatre in Edinburgh, along with playwright Gary McNair, wow, that's Scottish, are tackling issues raised by Trump's boasts about groping women in a play called Locker Room Talk. McNair said he was disappointed by conversations around Trump's behavior and wanted to ask deeper questions, like, why do men talk like this? Where do men talk like this? And what gives them the privilege and right to feel like they can? The play, based on interviews McNair conducted with men, will be performed by an all-female cast in February. The female director, Orla O'Loughlin, says the play seeks to elevate the voices of those left in the margins. She told Scotsman, "It's about reaching as diverse a group of men as possible, getting out of the echo chamber and being robust enough to take it and understand our very close proximity to it in our community and society. Never before have I read a sentence that was so full of a lack of self-awareness. I would hope that we surprise ourselves and we learn things and reveal things that we weren't expecting. I'm very excited about the show's future." I've said shit like that. My friends have said shit like that in the privacy of our homes or whatever. Women I know have said shit like that or worse than that. But I don't think anybody should be punished for it. I don't think it's like fucking get out the fainting couch and my pearls for clutching because I just heard somebody say the word pussy or whatever. So, I mean, they're going to make... They're not just going to say, grab 'em by the pussy for an hour. They're going to have an entire play. That means there's going to be lots of male statements. And I bet... I mean, I would not touch this fucking play with a fucking, like, 100-foot pole. But I'm betting that there will be a bunch of shit in here that isn't even offensive. It's only being turned into something offensive in order to manipulate people. You know,
this came up quite a lot at the BAM festival, by the way, because everyone was still talking about the election and stuff because it was still quite hot, and they were talking about, they zeroed in on the phrase locker room talk, and they were already discussing, you know, how do we clamp down on this thing they call locker room talk, this magical incantation they use to excuse the privilege of grabbing pussies. And that, you know, by next semester they're going to have it down and they're going to be teaching it to new students. Locker room talk is just code word for rape culture.
Next is the Doge and Bunny Show, where we look at a academic paper that examines how gay men are misogynist. Contemporary research has shown that a significant portion of gay men have traits, interests, occupations, and behaviors that are consistent with the stereotype of gay men as effeminate, androgynous, or unmasculine. A great number of gay men exhibit gender nonconformity during childhood. Most, however, defeminize during adolescence, possibly in response to stigmatization and society's gender role prescription. Only a relatively small percentage of gay men continue to be gender nonconforming in their adulthood, often at a price, as they also tend to have lower psychological well-being. Although gay culture historically appreciated camp and drag, which subvert the gender-based power hierarchy and celebrate gender nonconformity, anti-effeminacy, and prejudice, but prejudice is widespread amongst gay men. Ironically, gender nonconforming gay men may suffer from discrimination not only from society at large, but from other gay men, who are most likely to have experienced stigmatization and may have been effeminate earlier in their lives. Drawing from anecdotes and findings from various sources, this article suggests that beyond many gay men's erotic preference for masculinity lies contempt and hostility towards effeminacy and effeminate men on socio-political and personal levels. Does anyone want to butt in before I keep going?
Women most affected.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yes, there are some traits that you could say are definitely more feminine and definitely more masculine. But I think when it comes to gay culture, or the gay subculture, and also probably the lesbian subculture to a degree as well, it's usually when you have a partnering, that in my experience, so Joe, if I'm way off base, just correct me, there is usually a partner that is dominant and one that is submissive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that one is masculine and one is feminine, or that they're both masculine or both feminine, right? It's just, and I've seen this with lesbians, where there's usually like, you know, I don't want to say, well, there's usually the butch and then there's the femme. But that doesn't mean they don't both look, you know, it doesn't mean that they have to look a certain way or carry themselves a certain way. It's just that the dynamic in their relationship is actually going to still have dominant and submissive qualities.
The Kinsey scale is essentially a rating of attraction to same sex versus opposite sex. That it's, it's 0 to 6, I think. Something like that. 5, 6.
I'll look it up. This is actually the reason why I'm bringing it up is that the study that they're talking about here, they're not saying it's the Kinsey scale. They're saying it's
a Kinsey light scale.
It's like, it's not Coke. It's Cuke. It's Cuke.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Coke. It's Coke too.
Yeah. So anyway, and it essentially measures, you know, are you mostly straight? Are you kind of straight? Are you right in the middle? It has to do with...
It's 1 to 6.
Yay! I was right! Yay! Sort of. I remember. It's been a while since I've studied this in depth. But yeah, so the Kinsey scale is essentially... The Kinsey scale presupposes that we are all on a spectrum of sexual preference, which I don't actually disagree with, really. I think that it's often used to try and prove points, or like a Kinsey-like scale, which is not a Kinsey scale.
Yes.
So I'm like,
For example.
yes, for example.
I would think that the only issue I have with the Kinsey scale is not that there are people who could fall in that 2 to 5 range where you're, somewhat attracted to your sex, and maybe more so than the opposite. But where the only thing I guess I wonder about is, where do we sit? Like, this is not going to be a line, and I don't think it's going to be a bell curve. I think that by and large, most people are going to fall on one end or the other end, and then there's going to be people in the middle. But I don't think that number is a high number. I think that that's a minority, but I would be curious to find out.
I'm not sure.
And I think it's fine as a starting point.
And I bet it's different for men and women, too.
All the toxic masculinity stuff, obviously, I didn't identify with, so I rejected it. But ever since finding out that, it's not really an accurate representation of what masculinity is, really. And I've come to appreciate more positive aspects of masculinity and stuff like that. So,
thank you for clarifying. I was going to ask you for a bit on that, because masculinity isn't true. It from your perspective, as you've explained it, I would agree. I would say that the way masculinity is portrayed, especially in terms of this is something that all men do that is terrible, as in toxic masculinity, absolutely right. I have to admit, and perhaps you can shed some more light on this, Joe, because I've never talked to you before, and this is very exciting. But for me, I don't see a lot of really positive masculine presentation anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not.
And when masculinity is lauded, it seems to always be in terms of how it is of service to women, and that really gets under my skin.
Or children, sometimes.
Or children, yeah. Well, and children are, but
or just the weak in general.
In the current mindset, because
that's true.
Women and children are currently conflated because women are super more important to kids than dads, guys. Did you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start seeing it, it's hard to get away from it. I think that's why a lot of people throw their hands up and say, "Screw you guys, I'm going home." Because once you start seeing it, you can't unsee. Gay men are fucking men. And right now, now that they've been kicked out of the progressive stack, and they're being, from my perspective, gay men are now in this weird platypus state. Like you're a monotreme. You're not really any particular camp because you've been historically marginalized, but you're out of the progressive stack because you're a man.
Yeah.
So we're going to exclude you from studies because your results may prove that you're, normal men who don't buy into feminist theory. Mm-hmm. But we're going to include you in feminist theories when it does prove the point. So I kind of, from my perspective, the gay male community is just being lobbed around the tennis court right now. And very few people are actually listening, which is why I wanted to do this. And I was so happy that we were able to do this. And thank you for coming on, Joe.
Yeah.
But because gay men are fucking men, right? And they are. And that's why studies like this really, they scratch the brain meats and make you go, well, what are they saying? Are they, is it not okay for gay men to reject effeminate behavior? Is that not okay? And if it's considered not okay, why is that? Is it because it reflects badly on women? And if so, why are we considering something that reflects badly on women in terms of a culture that does not, it has nothing to do with women? Part of what I perceive as these current studies, citing these super ancient Methuselah studies from the 70s, is because research now that questions the narrative is just not being done. It's not accepted. It will be rejected. And why can we not find current studies backing anything close to biological preferences, right? Why can we not find current studies backing up things like beauty standards as an evolutionary advantage? I mean, everything I do in bio is all about what are the proximate and ultimate causes, and can you describe them and can you explain them? But this kind of academic rigor is not being applied to people, and it boggles my brain. So of course all these things are citing things from the fucking big Bush 70s, right? Because it's just not, well, you know what I mean? Come on, 70s porn, right? It's like, come on. But they're not being done now, and they won't get approved. So unless you are independently wealthy or you have amazing tenure and you can just force your way and strong arm and say, no, I'm doing this fucking study, it is simply going to be quietly shuffled aside in favor of something that suits the current narrative. And that is my big heartbreak right now in academia and with science in general. Because if you go into science thinking it will prove my worldview, you're doing it wrong. You go into the scientific process going, well, I have this suspicion, but I really don't know, so let's just see. And that is being lost. So that's my little bunny brain tangent tearing around the yard for now. With respect to the study, and gay and heterosexual men were similar in some traditionally masculine traits, e.g. dominance and boldness. Oh my god, so gay and heterosexual men have men traits? Really? Is this shocking? No, it's not, because they're men, right? These traits do not magically become positive if you're gay, and magically negative if you're straight, and there's no biology in the study whatsoever.
The reason why I found it kind of interesting was, is this behavior that these boys are engaging in, which is, not wanting to engage in rough and tumble play, preference for girls' games, cross-dressing, and preferring to be around the company of women, is that something that is enforced on them? Or is that something that they are choosing to do on their own? That's not necessarily shown, but if it is something that they are doing on their own, without the intervention of adults, then this is actually evidence against the idea that all of our sexuality and our gender performance is based on socialization, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, no, I found this paragraph so juicy, nom, because especially as the implications with the next one. I don't disagree with the assertions here, just even in terms of my own study and observation. I don't think it's a black and white rule of thumb. I don't think you can look at it, and this could be increased ad absurdum, and then you get guys going, I won't let my children play with dolls, my boy children play with dolls because it'll turn them gay. And it can be increased to that level of absurdity, of course, by some. But I do think that there are observable traits in childhood that may or may not form a basis as an indicator. I think putting too much emphasis on that as an indicator is really where the train goes off the rails. Because observation is not the same thing as intervention, right? You can observe things without doing anything about it. You can just go, oh, okay, let's see where this goes. Let's see what happens. And more harm, in my opinion, has been done to children with respect to gender things by very well-meaning people going, this is clearly what it means, so I'm going to help you, instead of just cooling their jets and seeing how it turns out. And so that's my perspective on that. But in the next sentence, so we've got a correlation between gender non-conforming boys and homosexuality in adulthood. And then we go into the adolescence. And a majority of gender non-conforming boys gradually become less feminine by the onset of adolescence, a process termed defeminization. Or, they get their full complement of hormones. I don't know. It's just a thought.
It could be.
It's just a thought. It could be. I don't know.
This idea that toys or activities that have a focus on creativity, which one of the biggest things that boys and girls do when they're really young is they engage in, make-believe play, right? Where they pretend, they play pretend games. It's like a role play. Even if they have nothing, they manage to do that. And that both in both sexes, that demands some creativity. but what women or girls will usually do and what boys will usually do are going to be different. And usually girls, it's usually more freeform, and it usually involves some kind of a simulation of a scenario. And I know that, again, this is a not all situation, but in my experience and what I've seen, girls usually do stuff that is more like it's a social activity. They simulate real life, but it's usually very sort of domestic type of thing, like they play house and stuff like that. And boys tend to do something that's a lot more action orientated, and because of it, boys usually make rules, and then the creation of rules also is part of that creative process. So they might say, well, if I shoot you, that means you die and you have to fall down, or
you have to establish the rules, obviously.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how is it fair?
Right, but when you're playing house or doctor or something, you don't need them, because it's basically more like a what's that type of comedy where people make shit up as they go along?
Improv.
It's more improvisation. Yes. The reason why gay men are shamed or persecuted is not to do with the fact that they are men who are gay, but rather to do with the fact that the issues that other men have is with femininity. And if they see it in gay men, they are just as bad, if not worse, than women. But women suffer more.
Yeah.
And writing about gay men's feminine stereotype, Leahy noted that effeminacy itself is highly stigmatized in the homosexual subculture. And this goes back to what Joe was saying when he said that...
yeah, I noticed that one.
Yeah.
That one just doesn't make any sense to me. Effeminacy itself is highly stigmatized in the homosexual subculture. It just...
Yeah.
It's false. There could be a great number of gay men could not choose not to, or actively reject. I guess this is why I was on the word reject, was because they do not like the effeminate homosexual subculture, so they choose not to. But they do it because the homosexual subculture is effeminate. That's how people signal that they're a part of the homosexual subculture.
Yes.
So how can it be highly stigmatized? That's what it is.
I don't think that criticizing your own culture for the negative parts of it, I don't see that as a bad thing at all, which is what this phrase says ultimately, the bit that I just read. But I think that the person who's authoring the piece is trying to frame it in such a way that it's not fair to people who are acting like stereotypes. And that they're the victims in that situation. And I don't think there is a victim. I think that basically you have a situation where gay people have, specifically gay men, because I don't think lesbians were affected by this, were struggling to be seen as human beings with, that need to be treated a certain way, and that they were able to contribute to society, and they weren't psychopaths that needed like a, I don't know if you remember, but I think there was like a video, like a PSA that was made long time ago that was like, you never know when he could be lurking about. The homosexual. He looks just like you and me. I'm serious. They used to do this. Like, I think this was like in the 50s or something.
There were executions.
The homosexual.
It was bad.
And he was framed as a pedophile. Like, he's your children. They could be playing with him right now. And so they fought hard against all that, all these misinformation, a lot of these old citations that are being used as evidence of bigotry that exists today, where there still is to some degree, but I don't think it's anything like it used to be. So you work really hard to do this. You don't want to see, or it may annoy people within the gay community to see people who are essentially acting in a regressive way that isn't helping. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to conform and fall in line and behave a certain way, but rather when you see people acting like walking, talking stereotypes, you're probably going to be a little bit annoyed by that.
Where does society think that men and masculinity are considered superior to women and femininity? Like, where is that? That doesn't...
Well, I
see no evidence for that.
I see what you're saying, but yeah, I was going to say that's patriarchy. This is usually when study. Okay, so before we did this show, I watched a lecture that a man gave about this very same topic, and he was a gay man. He was talking about gay misogyny. He was also talking gay misogyny towards women, gay misogyny towards effeminate gay men, and the idea of homophobia itself comes from misogyny. So everything leads back to misogyny.
That pisses me off so much.
Yes,
I know,
yes,
right?
yes. It all leads back there.
All roads lead to patriarchy.
Yes.
Theory,
So
baby.
this is
Hegemonic
the way that he began his talk was he started by saying, "Okay, it's obvious that we live in a patriarchy. It's obvious that women are the oppressed gender, and it's obvious that we believe that masculine qualities are superior to feminine qualities." This was the starting point. This is basically where they began from, because that's how this works. That's how this works. So yes, if you say I don't understand it, that's because it's being asserted as though it was just scripture and you can't question it. It has been written, and so therefore it must be done, and that's it. So we obviously know that can't be where it comes from, but we are tasked with with having to tear this apart and look at it. So yeah, everything wrong with gay people, it's because they hate women, specifically men.
Well, they talk about further empirical evidence for the hegemonic masculinity theory. I'm just reading further on, like
patriarchy.
What empirical evidence, please?
The patriarchy exists.
Anything. I want anything.
You have to just feel it. It's in all living things.
How?
It surrounds us. It penetrates us. The patriarchy is everywhere. It's an energy field.
Yeah, and I love how in this they divide how men. They're talking about you, Joe. They talk about how men deal with their homosexual feelings by either conforming or defying the construct. And my note is, maybe they just live their lives and just don't think about it. I mean, do we really have to pathologize fucking gay men? Do we have to turn?
I don't.
No, we don't have to turn everything gay men do into some kind of something that's wrong. Maybe they just live their lives and have choices and sort themselves out.
Finally, we have Honey Badger Radio number 81, where we interview author and gender equalist Tim Goldich.
The core concept of the book is this idea that it all balances out. That's sort of my soundbite. That's my 4-word soundbite. And what that means, I see a gender reality in which a woman is and has always been as powerful as man, and that through her own feminine channel, she has always applied an equal overall force of influence in the human system, and is therefore equally responsible for outcomes. Man is and has always been as victimized, that what woman has suffered, the enormous consequences and vast repercussions that woman has suffered for being less respected, has been matched in full by the enormous consequences and vast repercussions suffered by men for being less loved. I basically see a gender reality in which mirrors are, in my judgment, the best and healthiest sort of metaphor for gender reality. So that I see gender issues as mirrored back and forth between men and women.
Yeah, no, I always really liked your approach too, because it essentially it applies responsibility and equally across the board. And I don't even know if, like, I wouldn't even say blame, because I don't think that anything that you talk about really involves blame. I mean, like,
that's correct. Yes, I consider blame to just be a useless sort of judgment back and forth that doesn't really help anything. I use the word accountability or responsibility. Right.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that I really like about your work, is that you just essentially say things the way you see it, and you don't really it's like anybody who could possibly call you a misogynist is out of their freaking mind.
Yeah.
You know, or the whole idea that, you know, someone like you is blaming women. Well, no, but you acknowledge women's power.
That's right, and I respect women enough to hold them accountable for, their equal partnership in molding our human world.
It's one of those things that certain groups are just experts at, is pulling victimhood out of the jaws of privilege. Like men have like one kind of shoes, flat-heeled shoes. It's in fact they get made fun of for wearing elevator heels.
Well,
right?
that's right. Yeah, I know.
Unless you want cowboy
the
boots.
Opposite of her complaints would be a man going on about, well, look at the wide variety of colors and textures you get to choose from. All I get is black, brown, and white, and my shoes are just purely practical, just for working in, because that's all I'm expected to do is work to pay for your closet full of shoes, So right, so.
And that's what I mean. That's why I call it, pulling victimhood from the jaws of privilege.
Yeah,
we get all kinds of awesome choices, and it's like Karen was just saying, we have the choice to wear comfortable shoes if we want to. Right. So choosing to wear uncomfortable shoes because we know they make us look hot is privilege by the definition that feminism gives to privilege.
It all balances out. It is a concept. It is an invitation. It is a leap of faith. It is a principle. There is no giant balance beam in the sky that we can look at, and go, reduce alimony by 10%, and this thing goes bing, 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 and there it is, and it's all balanced out. So it all balances out is clearly not an objective fact, but it is many other things that I think are just healthy. It's an outlook, When I say it's a leap of faith, what I mean by that is that I know my own inner experience. I know every sort of cultural arrow for which I'm the target, because I'm the target, but I don't know every cultural arrow for which you may be the target, I can't be aware of all that. So in a sense, I just have to kind of make the decision, the leap of faith that my pain is equal to yours and your pain is equal to mine.
I think that's actually, I don't know that it has to be a leap of faith. I mean, it's really hard to quantify suffering, right?
Yeah.
As Fred Hayward said, okay, so you lost a job opportunity. Well, that sucks, right? But at least you can apply for another job, right? I can't just, when I lose my son because I'm a man, my child, right? I can't just go and say, well, I'll try and get custody of that kid over there. That doesn't work.
No.
So, but it's very and the whole idea, and we call it in this neck of the woods, oppression Olympics, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, we all, you got to tally up all your score and everything, and whoever has the most points, their suffering is worse than. And that might work in terms of that actually might apply not across the board or in the way that they use it, but it might apply to things like race or class, right?
Yeah.
But none of those things, none of the things that we use to assess things like class privilege,
right.
Class oppression and stuff, none of those apply to men and women.
That's right. Gender is completely different. Gender is, we might make a big deal out of race, but it's not a big deal. Gender is, I mean, if you look at it like metaphysically, the whole yin yang and all that, it's fundamental. It's profound. And gender is mirrored, as I see it. I think the love-respect dynamic has a very powerful explanatory.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Of how to sort of figure it. And I guess I guess men kind of get screwed on all things along the love axis, and women sort of get screwed on everything along the respect axis. Is sort of how I look at it traditionally and historically.
There's also a degree to which suffering is a personal choice that is based on your outlook. And it doesn't account for everything, but it does account for like a degree, a portion of your suffering in a situation that you consider adverse. You know, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, it's still your outlook that sort of affects the last little bit of how it hits you.
And how does feminism affect women's outlook?
Exactly. It amplifies that to an exponential degree, and it's kind of sickening.
Right. So no wonder that in recent decades, all measures of female happiness have plummeted, and the correlation between the most feminist cultures producing the least happy women is like 100% correlation all around the world.
That's one of the reasons why I like your idea of balance and discussing balance and focusing on that, because like one of the things that's been heavily discussed in the men's rights movement is that we don't want to become a mirror of feminism. And that's one of the reasons right there. We're not looking to make men feel victimized. We're looking to fix what's dysfunctional in society that impacts on both sexes, and also at the child stage of life, it impacts on both sexes. And that's it.
The Mankind Project is based on something they'll call the sort of mythopoetic men's movement. That's Iron John. That's a look at masculinity in terms of honor, integrity, accountability. It's a place where men go through an initiation weekend called the NWTA, the New Warrior Training Adventure, and come out sort of initiated men. This is something that the founders believe is missing in our culture, is this whole idea of men initiating men into manhood.
Right.
So what you end up with then is you go through this weekend, you get some tools for living and understanding, how I am in my own way. And then I join what's called an I group, where the I stands for integration, where we go to integrate the lessons of the weekend into our lives. And that becomes like a family, a brotherhood. So I've been in this I group since January of 2000. So these other men in this group, they're brothers. And now, Mankind Project has nothing to do with the politicized aspects of the masculine. Unfortunately, it seems to be impossible to get MKP interested in the welfare of men in general, but only just the welfare of the men that are members that have gone through this weekend at Connect. But it was a lifesaver for me. I mean, I super recommend it to men. It has absolutely nothing to do with an MRA thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's strictly for men to get together and bond. And I just look to those guys for anything and everything. And they hold me accountable, when I'm getting all whiny and I'm in my victim, and they pull me out of it, and they they support me when I'm depressed. They take me to the hospital when I'm sick. I mean, they're my family. So at the time, they were really a lifesaver, because I was not getting what I needed from either family or women. And so they gave me absolutely vital sort of emotional support and tools for living too. It's a great organization, I think.
One of the things that that I always found hilarious was that it's sort of like, because feminism tends to see masculinity as the creator of all, and this is really bizarre, considering what they want and how they feel about men and women. Masculinity, Like, men created the entire system and imposed it on women, right? And so toxic masculinity is intrinsic to maleness. It comes from men themselves, right? It isn't something that they learned. It's something that they taught each other, right? And whereas toxic femininity, if they would ever actually let such a phrase come out of their mouths, would be something that is imposed. It's the unrealistic beauty standards that are imposed on women by all of the men in charge of the fashion magazines, and who are CEOs of wrinkle cream companies and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
And and it's just like, so the entire thing, they even if they were going to admit that there is such a thing as toxic femininity that is taken to its dark extreme, they just blame it on men.
Yeah. Well, you want some more theoretical stuff? I mean, that's what I kind of into. That's what I like. So here's my theory on that. So toward men, we tend to direct accountability without compassion, which is ruthless. It is respecting men as autonomous, empowered beings that are adults, that are responsible for creating their own predicaments, but it does not love men enough to empathize with their situation. Meanwhile, for women, the formula is compassion without accountability, which is infantilizing, which is just as bad. And it is loving women to the extent of empathizing with them and viewing women as vulnerable beings worthy of empathy, but does not respect women as powerful adults responsible for their effect in the world. So, so all of this comes down to this idea that men have the power and women are the victims. So why should women be so addicted to this idea that they are the victims, and why should men be so addicted to the idea that they have the power? Well, as I see it, each sex has their egos invested in different baskets. So the male ego is basically invested in intellect, competence, prestige, toughness, strength, and courage, while women, the ego is basically invested in beauty, grace, goodness, home, family, parenting, all things along the love axis. The men are their respect axis and women are their love axis. So if women are going to be addicted to holding the moral high ground, addicted to virtue, then they're also going to be addicted to victim, because a victim is innocent. It's an innocent victim. You can't blame the victim.
If you look at the way feminists talk about this versus the way the mythopoetic men's movement talks about it, you can, the big difference that I'm seeing is noting dysfunction versus laying blame. That when I was trying to chase down the origin of the term toxic masculinity, I noticed that the feminists use it to sort of impose the idea that ruggedness in men itself is toxic. That's bad. Shame on you for not being girly. You don't deal with things the way women deal with things. Obviously, you're wrong. Whereas the mythopoetic men's movement seem to use it more as a way to describe the way human dysfunction affects men differently than the way it affects women. And it doesn't make it anybody's fault. It's human dysfunction. But it's going to hit people in different ways depending on their sex and the way their sex shapes them. And because of that, mythopoetic men's movement is able to discuss toxic femininity also, whereas feminists have that term, but they don't use it.
Right. Yeah, much of the mythopoetic comes out of, like, Carl Jung and archetypes, and so we divide the male psyche into king, lover, warrior, magician. It's like a Robert Moore book. And we recognize that each of those has their shadow archetype, and then the women have therefore like crone and I don't know, whatever.
The virgin mother,
and the light side and shadow side, each of those. So that's like a Robert Moore theoretical framework that derives from Carl Jung and such. Yeah.
the whole idea that that men do things differently from women, and like, because this is really what the feminist idea of toxic masculinity is if men do anything differently than women do, then it's toxic, right? So I mean, like, not all men are toxic. That's 17% or so of men who are a little more feminine, right, and do things a little more the way women do, right? They're the ones who are the ideal, even though no women want to fuck them, right? And then all of these other men who are doing things the way men do, even if whether they're healthy or not, right?
Within those circles, the big irony I see is that the masculine really only gains approval when it's displayed by a woman, and the feminine really only gets approval when it's displayed by a man. For a woman to be feminine is to be a doormat, to be the second sex, to be a victim, to be accommodating and less than. But suddenly that same femininity becomes something wonderful when displayed by a man, and vice versa. When a man displays any masculinity, he's being a prick and a dominant oppressor and so on. But when a woman displays masculinity, then she's being assertive and liberated, and so yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'd have an easier time saying what I would hope would be the future of gender politics, and that would be, well, first of all, that the other half of gender reality sees the light of day. So the female power, male victimization, man good, woman bad half of gender reality is brought out and placed on the other end of the balance beam. And what I would hope for eventually is to see a balance in the gender system. I would hope that eventually woman and man might sort of call it even, as it were, kind of look at, eventually sort of end the contest for most powerless victim and just kind of call it a draw. I don't see that happening anytime soon, mind you, but I would hope that eventually that would happen. And if that should happen, then I see all kinds of possibilities opening up. Now I see like equalists working on gender politics with the understanding that gender reality is mirrored. So, I'm not gonna engage in a conversation about sexual harassment with a feminist, because I'm going to get all this attitude, right? I'm going to get all this self-righteousness, and she's going to operate from the assumption that these female troubles stand alone, that men have no parallel for these things, and that men are all fault and blame for all these things, and she doesn't see any female agency. But someday perhaps there'll be equalists, see? And then I would be more than happy to engage in a conversation about sexual harassment with an equalist. I'm fascinated by all things gender, so I want to hear, tell me what this is like, how does that feel, and what does that do to you? And I'd be very curious and very open and available to what she'd have to say. But you see, in dealing with an equalist, I know that she knows that I know that she knows that I know that she knows that there's mirror opposites for these things, and that the mirror opposite of sexual harassment is economic harassment. So if sexual harassment is sexually empowered women being targeted for unwanted attentions that are undermining and insulting and
humanizing a bit,
and that leads all the way to from one extreme up to all the way to rape. Then economic harassment is economically empowered men being targeted for false accusations, for paternity fraud, all the way up to marrying a man with the preconceived notion that you're going to divorce him, take his children, and live off his big bucks for the rest of your life. So,
right.
So we, as equalists, we know that these things have these parallels. And so I'm not getting this attitude from her when we're talking sexual harassment. She's willing to take, her share of the responsibility in this issue. She realizes that men have a parallel issue. So, I can talk with an equal. So I can see this concept of calling it even, or it all balances out. It's completely transforming not only gender politics but gender politicians, and I can see a way to evolve the whole system, and that would eventually affect a great evolution in gender relations and repair the social fabric. So that's what I would hope we would head in that direction.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.